the diversity issue, and about immigration, and about refugees, and about borders, all subjects to major national debates. Our guests take the issues on as patriotic Canadian and American Muslims. Each is a founding member of the Muslim Reform Movement. They were labeled extremists by Liberal MP Arif Virani over their challenge of MP Iqra Khalid's M103 after having been invited by Parliament to disclose their points of view. And we did try to get Mr. Virani to come on the show and, in fact, debate one of my guests, but we never heard back from Mr. Virani. Raheel Raza joins me. Her book is Their Jihad, Not My Jihad. Her website is raheelraza.com. She's an educator. She's a speaker. She's a patriotic Canadian. She's a devout Muslim. And when she spoke at Canada's Parliament, maybe Mr. Virani wasn't aware of this, she received a standing ovation. Raheel, thank you so much for taking the time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Roy.
And Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is a former United States Navy lieutenant commander, former president of the Arizona Medical Association. He's a cardiologist. He is also the founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and his book is Battle for the Soul of Islam. We've spoken many times to Dr. Jasser on this program. And Zuhdi, it's great to have you back with us.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Roy. Thanks for having me.
Let me start with you, Raheel. When Mr. Trudeau speaks about diversity at some length, I feel like I'm being told that I had better up my game as a Canadian. Am I misunderstanding him?
No, I don't think you're misunderstanding him. But the problem is that, he has been touting this word, diversity and multiculturalism, for ever so long, without understanding that diversity is an organic issue. I mean, this is something that takes place because we are diverse people living here. It can't be a policy of the government. You can't force people to like each other. And this is what he seems to be, constantly pounding upon, because after all, he was a school teacher, so he's, got this innate habit of lecturing, and this is what he's constantly doing. I don't see how he thinks that talking about diversity is going to avoid discussing the important issues that we have to talk about. It can't be a cover-up for what is happening in our communities, in our societies, which are issues that we must address head on. But multiculturalism and diversity in Canada, especially because multiculturalism is a government policy, is a way of shutting people up to say, let's ghettoize them. Everybody, you live, in your own communities, and we'll fund you to learn your languages and, promote your heritage, which is wonderful, of course. But what about Canadian values? I'm an immigrant to Canada. I've been here for 30 years, and I've always felt that we don't talk enough about Canadian values. We talk about everything else, and this is what this, diversity and multiculturalism has done to us.
When you read I'm sure you read Maxime Bernier's tweets.
Yes, of course. I responded. I said, thank you. It's about time a leader or a politician said the truth, because, this was absolutely on the spot, and I'm horrified at the backlash that he's getting for this. Because he, when he called it the cult of diversity, he was absolutely right. This is about people living in ghettos and tribes and their all and their own cultural tents without understanding the values which brought us here in the first place, and the values which make us Canadian, because we just don't talk about that. No, that is politically incorrect. When have I ever heard a Prime Minister say, let's talk about Canadian values? So Maxime Bernier really said it as it is.
Zuhdi, in the United States, with the turnover in the White House going from President Obama to President Trump, much of what I've been hearing about diversity and much of what I've been hearing about the position of multiculturalism or multicultural reality from Mr. Obama and his administration, of course, we're not hearing that from Trump now, is what's going on in your country? How would you describe what's happening in the United States as far as the diversity argument is concerned, or the multicultural question is concerned, and how are Americans responding to what's happening?
Well, I think in many ways it's similar. The far left has, during the Obama era especially, exploited identity politics in order to balkanized society, and through that balkanization, by dividing us up into many minorities, they end up claiming they own the minorities, and that we, whether we're Arabs or blacks or any minority that they want to fit into the box, that they feel the left will respond to those problems better than the right, and that balkanization. I mean, to tell you frankly, it runs against the entire American dream. My family escaped the racism of the Arab states, of Syria, of Egypt, of Saudi Arabia, and else that's run by single families and treats their people as slaves, to come to the American dream, which is that anybody through a free market has a chance to be successful, run their own business, be a politician, be a leader. And to the left, that's simply about skin color. It's simply about heritage. It's not about skill set. It's not about meritocracy. So this is the problem, is that diversity to the left is a bigotry of low expectations, where the minorities are simply used, as Obama did, to use the minorities as a prop in order to justify their own control of our society. And now I think with the Trump administration and with some shifts, the community is pushing back and saying that's not what America's about. And yet they label a policy that's an immigration policy to prevent Islamists from coming in. They're calling that a Muslim ban and still trying to balkanize their society, when in fact it's not a Muslim ban. It's a ban against people who see the country the way our founding fathers fought against, which was against theocracy. So hopefully we can get back to the ideas and the tweets that he put out were perfect beginning of a conversation that has been long overdue.
You can't avoid, can you, Raheel? You can't avoid or redirect public fatigue, which gives way to expression, which gives way to frustration, which eventually will give way to serious challenge.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, the reason my family and I came to Canada was to embrace the values of freedom of speech, and all the other values that go with it. And I find it so frustrating when our lovely Prime Minister says there is no core identity, no mainstream in Canada. Well, I'm sorry, but millions of people have come here because of the values that Canada espouses. And we have to talk about these things, because this is exactly, as you say, what happens. You can't stop people from expressing their opinions. And Maxime Bernier received an official rebuke from Andrew Scheer, which is something that should not have happened. But he accused him of playing identity politics. I think it's the other way around. Diversity, multiculturalism allow us to play identity politics, because it start asking us to have hyphenated identities. And again, we have MPs who are of different ethnic backgrounds, but a few of them have hyphenated identities. I never want to be a hyphenated Canadian. I am Canadian. My children are Canadian. Our loyalty is to this country, and we uphold the values that this country has given us. And we want to talk more about that.
Mm-hmm. Remember 1996, I think it was 1996, the federal census, you weren't allowed to tick a box where you identified yourself simply as Canadian. You had to be something hyphen Canadian. There was no option to mark yourself as a Canadian, and then they told us, well, you can write it in if it bothers you.
Yes, well, it did bother me, and I did write it in. There are all these labels that people have, a woman of color, a woman of Asian descent. No, I'm a Canadian, and that is why I came here, and I embrace everything that is good in Canada, which, of course, allows me to criticize that which troubles me, which is, people who bash Maxime Bernier for speaking the truth. And truth has also sort of gone by the side because of regressive left, because of political correctness, and because we're living in a time where you just don't get people to speak the truth. So I'm thankful for you for having us on this program to discuss this. And coming from me as an immigrant, I hope it matters that I'm a proud Canadian, and I want to uphold Canadian values. My heritage is there, and I have the freedom to enjoy it as much as I can. But in the public, in the mainstream, I am a Canadian.
Zudi, let me ask you the same question, or run the same words past you. You cannot avoid and you cannot redirect public anger and fatigue. Eventually, people will make themselves heard, make themselves known, and if you try to shut them up, it's not going to work.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And, the bottom line is do we respect each other with equality, or are we going to continue to patronize individuals as being identified by their ethnicity? So in many ways, the comments of Bernier are a tough love. One of his tweets said members of various ethnic communities are fed up with platitudes. They're active members of our society at all levels, and they demand no special status. They just want equal opportunity. When I was in the Navy, nobody cared what nationality I was, what race I was. We were equally together, sworn in as officers to fight for the protection of our Constitution and national security and the missions that I served in Somalia and elsewhere. That is what America's about. It wasn't about which color I was or which identity politic box I checked. And yet we're told that we're supposed to respond and be represented by the mafia that runs our organizations and many Islamist groups that emanate from petro-Islamic interests out of Iran or out of Saudi Arabia or elsewhere. And that's the checkbox that folks like Iqra Khalid and others want to represent our community. And yet voices like Raheel's and mine get marginalized. Why? Because we respect our American and Canadian identity as free thinkers over the Islamist theocratic movement.
Raheel, how does this end?
That's a very good question. We're worried about that as well. How this ends is that we all stand up in support of Maxime Bernier. And one of the things that I find that the average Canadian on the street somewhat lacks is, there is a sense of apathy. They don't stand up and speak out as easily and quickly as we find people in the United States do. And I wish they would. Canadians who are voters, Canadians who don't like what is happening, M103, the Islamists, all this division and ghettoization. They have the same ideas and feelings as you and I do, but they don't speak out. They must speak out, write letters to the editor, express their opinions. Of course, today we live in a world of social media. They must express their opinion. And the travesty of this was, as you know very well, that there was a statue of Sir John A. Macdonald, which was removed, a bronze statue in Victoria. And, in contrast, there was a statue of the founder of Pakistan, which was erected in Winnipeg, and none of the MPs of Pakistani heritage said a word about this. None of them spoke about the fact that Pakistan has sided with Saudi Arabia in its angst and backlash against Canada. So, these are questions that we ask our children. When my son was in school, I asked him that if you go into the Canadian Army and, hypothetically, if there's a war between Pakistan and Canada, because we are from Pakistan, where do you stand? He said, I'm Canadian. And I'm so proud of them. Like, they don't think twice. They're not hyphenated Canadians. Mm-hmm. They're Canadian and their loyalty is to Canada because that is what we've taught them. But how many schools teach this?
How many schools, how many provinces actually teach history, real Canadian history, and teach it with some level of pride and commitment? That's the question. Not very many. What about the United States? We have about 30 seconds left. Sudi, is history, American history, taught with conviction in the United States?
It's being taught as simply to accentuate the guilt for parts of our history that we're trying to correct and that we long had. So that's the part that's taught. The part about what Jefferson and Madison, the part about the First Amendment's religious freedom, freedom of speech, how they fought against theocracy, all the elements that I tried to embrace, to use as tools to advance us, I get marginalized as a result because of the identity politics.
Dr. Jasser, Raheel Raza, thank you both very much. Good talking to you.
Thank you for having us. Thanks. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Thanks. Conservative Party. Talk to him in just a couple of seconds. I just want to read this to you. Just to bring it back to the beginning, on Sunday last, Maxime Bernier, and you know his story, issued a series of tweets on diversity, 6 of them. And he said, in part, Trudeau's extreme multiculturalism and cult of diversity will divide us into little tribes. More diversity will not be our strength. It will destroy what has made us such a great country. And then there's some headlines that, here's a headline from, here's one headline. Scheer cautions Bernier, members of caucus need to work together. And then another one, Andrew Scheer joins caucus members in condemning Bernier's identity politics. Andrew Scheer joins us on the Roy Green Show on the Chorus Radio Network. Mr. Scheer, thank you for taking the time. And are you caught in a, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are you caught in a bit of a catch-22 situation? This is your guy. He's a member of your caucus. He was a member of your front bench. He's no longer because of an action you took. And he said some things and he's tweeted some things that are controversial and not appreciated by some members, or maybe many of your caucus. But others probably feel reasonably positively about what he tweeted. So are you caught between what you can say, can do, can't do?
Not at all. We've always had a very clear message on this, and I know that there are many people who are frustrated at the way Justin Trudeau has handled several issues related to this. You know, Trudeau says that we are a country that doesn't have an identity, and Conservatives have rejected that. We believe that we can and must be a country that celebrates and passes on our cultural traditions, the history of what made this country great, while at the same time recognize that we have been the country for many, many years, many generations, have welcomed people from all over the world of many different backgrounds. And we can do both. And I think there's a lot of frustrations with the government right now. And speak very clearly and say we can be a country that opens its doors to people looking for better opportunity, looking for freedom, looking for a stable country, and recognizing what made Canada the type of place that offers that to the world.
Does the frequency expressed this week that Maxime Bernier is connecting more with Canadians through his tweet than you are with your statements suggest to you that perhaps Andrew Scheer should change his view, or at least modify your explanations about how immigration and multiculturalism, and we'll get to the illegal border crossings in a moment, that maybe you should modify your statements more if a significant percentage of people in this country are siding with Maxime Bernier? Or do you think that's just emotional response from a fairly small cross-section of Canadians?
Well, no, I think many people are responding to what has been portrayed. I think the issue with what Maxime has done is, you know, it took me by surprise. I haven't heard him express those types of things in that manner before, and giving the impression that the two are mutually impossible to do. The two things of welcoming people from around the world, recognizing that we are a country made up of people from very diverse backgrounds, and at the same time work towards integration, promote the acceptance and the embracement of fundamental Canadian principles like equality, tolerance, the rule of law.
How do you do that? How do you do? Well, how would you change Mr. Trudeau's policies to fit what you have just explained to us we need to do? Because Mr. Trudeau's policies, your policies need to be different from his if you're going to win next year.
Absolutely, and they absolutely have been. And when Justin Trudeau said that Canada didn't have a national identity, we firmly rejected that. I have spoken out against the extreme political correctness that we've seen, and like taking down the statues of John A. Macdonald. I've said that we have to be the country that can recognize mistakes in the past without erasing the contribution made to Canada by key figures. We can have immigration process that puts an emphasis on integration. You'll remember the previous citizenship guide that ensured that newcomers that were coming to Canada had a better understanding of the type of country that they were moving to. And I've always said, and you'll find our shadow ministers, our members of parliament have always said that Canada is the place that people want to come to. It's the place that people
but you know what I hear, Mr. Scheer, what I hear from people is that you're not really going to, if you become the Prime Minister, you will really not change very much, because you, like other politicians, will see the value of votes, and you will play both sides against the middle. That's an accusation that's made against virtually all politicians. But you and I are having this conversation now, not because you're resonating with Canadians whose votes you need, but because you're not.
Well, I disagree wholeheartedly there with you. You know, we're my approach of bringing people together and working on issues with a positive attitude on things and a positive message is resonating extremely well. If you look at how our party is doing, we're out fundraising the Liberals 2-1. We just picked up a by-election in Quebec. We've been talking about the issues that matter to Canadians. We're promoting lawful immigration. We've been calling on the government to do something about the illegal border crossings. We've offered ideas. We have rejected the identity politics from the left, you know, from the Liberals when it comes to things like Motion M103 that engage in that. But at the same time, I have no problem with the idea that we can go into cultural communities and talk about how conservative principles will improve the quality of life for newcomers from anywhere in Canada, not to offer them a different set of policies, but to say, hey, great to have you here in Canada. Here's how we're going to lower your tax.
You there?
Safe. And here's the type of country you've arrived in, one that's based on equality, the rule of law, democratic institutions, and tolerance. And we can do both. And I reject the idea that you have to put the two things at odds of welcoming people from different backgrounds.
But you don't want Trudeau to make the argument that, look, Andrew Scheer is either he's going to say you're just another Stephen Harper, or he's going to say that you're using his policies and just slightly changing them. People have to understand what it is you're doing. Now, if I can go into this issue, and we only have limited time with you, so John A. Macdonald's statue being cut down in Victoria, British Columbia, that caused a great deal of concern among Canadians, whether it's newly arrived Canadians or multi-generational Canadians. That was a really significantly troubling issue, and it set a precedent, Mr. Scheer. Would you speak to that, please?
Yes, absolutely, and I am very much opposed to this type of thing. I think it's a very dangerous mindset to look through the lens of modern day situation and look back and start to say, well, we're going to erase the key figures in Canadian history. I believe that we can look at what happened at various times and acknowledge that there were injustices committed. And say, those are things that we would not allow to have happen today, and these are things that we're trying to right. But for heaven's sake, we can look at those great characters in Canadian history who have built this country, who have achieved great things, and we can celebrate that while at the same time learning from the mistakes of the past. And it is a dangerous mindset to think that you have to erase and blot out anyone who has any flaw. We are all flawed human beings, and as time progresses and different societies progress in terms of human rights and equality, obviously there are things that we would never allow to be repeated. But I am very much opposed to that type of extreme political correctness that whitewash, it just blots out important key figures in Canadian history.
No, I can't do that. So you have the convention next week in Halifax. Do you want Mr. Bernier out of the party? Do considerable numbers of your caucus wish that? And should we expect that at next week's Conservative convention in Halifax, Mr. Bernier might find himself expelled?
I think the proper way to look at that is to recognize that Maxime Bernier has a choice. It's his choice. It's his choice as to whether or not to work as a team, to work at these things collaboratively. If he has a view on how we should be communicating or on what to bring that forward, as every other member of Parliament in our caucus is asked to do. I hope he chooses to do just that. I believe that members of our party, conservative voters across the country, want to defeat Justin Trudeau in the next election. And that should be Maxime's primary goal as well. And I've asked all members of our caucus to make that their primary goal, to work towards that. And now the choice is with Maxime. He needs to choose, does he want to help defeat Justin Trudeau in the next election?
It's going to be an interesting 14 months. What should we look for from your convention next week?
Well, as with any convention, we're going to be working on policy frameworks about how a conservative party would address the issues of the day. A lot has changed since our last convention, so we have a robust grassroots process that allows members to put forward ideas. I'll be giving a speech where I'll be laying out the contrast points between how the Liberal government has been handling things and how a Conservative government would offer a positive solution to the challenges of the day. And of course, we'll be talking a little bit about how we bring that message to Canadians. I've always believed that Conservative principles can be applied to any situation, any challenge facing Canadians. It is the Conservative approach that always leads to greater prosperity and a greater quality of life. It's just the key for us is how we connect with individuals, whether they're in Halifax, where our convention is, or on the prairies in Saskatchewan, where I'm from, or in big cities like Toronto and Vancouver. So we have a great convention. I'm looking forward to it, and I know that we're going to come out of it stronger than ever.
All right. Well, I thank you for coming on the show. I criticized you some time ago for not being available really certainly to me and to some other media, but you've shown that's not the case, and I appreciate you talking to us today. Thank you, Mr. Scheer.
Well, it's always my pleasure. We can't always accommodate requests every time, but we certainly do when we can like to come on and have an opportunity to discuss the issues that are important to your listeners.
It's important. Yeah. Thanks so much. Andrew Scheer, the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, on the Roy Green. You're seeing